On this episode of Insight, guilt. What power does it hold over us, and can we break it?
I actually had guilt for not killing someone.
Dad, there's been a shooting at the elementary school. Principal's dead.
I felt like I sent them to their demise in a way. What if I had have been more vocal for Dreamworld with maintenance of the rides?
Essentially, I started an affair with this man.
What is guilt?
Guilt is one of those things that you can't just say you don't deserve it and it goes off. It just lingers.
It does drive me to do more work.
Police emergency, Stendhal.
I need to read a message to you. Sorry, I have a gun in front of me.
Okay.
So Australia is under attack by Islamic State. There are 3 bombs in 3 different locations.
First tonight to the dramatic situation continuing in Sydney's CBD. Police are negotiating with an armed offender who has been holding an unknown number of people hostage.
The heart of Sydney is forced into lockdown. It all began just before 10 o'clock this morning inside the Lindt Cafe in Martin Place.
Late this afternoon, New South Wales Police confirmed they had activated Task Force Pioneer, meaning the hostage situation was now being treated as a terrorist attack.
The city siege forces the country's peak security agencies into action.
The Channel 7 newsroom has been taken over by tactical response officers.
A long and terrifying day for people in Sydney. There have been evacuations across the city, road closures and even some office lock-ins. The siege is now in its 13th hour.
The officers that are there are well trained and professional. They have trained for this, and I'm sure this will be an outcome that will be positive.
Thank you so much for being here. Mark, you were a former tactical police sergeant. You were one of the snipers on duty that day when 18 people were taken hostage. At some point during the 17-hour siege, you believed you had a clear shot of the gunman. What was going through your mind at that time?
We had an opportunity at about 7:30 that night. I could see man Monis. I was with 2 other former colleagues that were seeing the same thing as I could see. We had about 10 minutes where we could see him, and we missed that opportunity.
You decided not to shoot. How did things unfold?
Well, I decided not to shoot because I wasn't, although people were being held against their will, what I was not wanting to trigger was the detonation of the bomb by shooting him at that time. So as everyone probably knows, things unfolded by the siege ensued and people got killed. Tory Johnson got killed because that opportunity never raised its head again. Where that 10-minute window from 7:38 to 7:48 never existed again.
Thank you, Mark. And just want to check in how you're feeling. You're going okay?
Yeah, I've got a tremor on my left side.
Yeah,
so
no, that's all good. You're feeling okay.
It's a neurological thing.
Yeah, of course. Are you happy to keep going?
Yeah, sure.
Great. The siege ended when gunman man Haron Monis was shot by one of your colleagues. How did you start to process what had happened?
At the time, I was actually quite calm and comforting my colleagues who were more upset than I was at the time. But then over a period of months and weeks afterwards and years afterwards, I was exhausted by flashbacks of Tory dying the way he did and not being able to save him when I could. So the presence of guilt started to arise when I actually had guilt for not killing someone, which is an unusual way of putting it because most normal people have an inherent resistance to killing another human. But through process of training in the military and police, you go through periods of desensitising yourself to that in periods where you can justify it to doing so. So when the time comes, you can do what you need to do.
So you feel like you could have saved Tory Johnson and you felt guilty in a way because you didn't shoot the gunman?
It was a complicated situation. It was a difficult shot. We had to remove glass at our end because when a bullet leaves the muzzle of a gun, it needs a period of stabilisation before it hits something. So we needed to pick a hole where we were to shoot through that and then hit him, but it could have been done. It was an achievable shot. We proved that in testing afterwards. We just missed that opportunity, so it was gone forever.
How would you describe those feelings of guilt following the incident?
It wasn't rational in the sense that I didn't commit the siege and I didn't cause him to die, but there's a very real feeling of guilt because he could have been saved by me or my colleagues at the time we saw him. So I suppose most people put in a similar situation might carry guilt in that way if they were subject to the same context of how things unfolded.
And did that guilt begin to affect you in other parts of your life too?
For about 2 years afterwards, I hung in there and did as best as I could, but I ended up having panic attacks just on everyday work when there was no reason to panic. And again, with that, a very real situation, but my rational brain was saying there's nothing to be scared of here, but it was very real sense of anxiety and threat when there was no threat, really.
Darren, you and your family lived in Connecticut in the United States. In 2012, you received an email alert from your local council. What did that email say?
It said school shooting. So and my rational brain, because I had been a police officer, similar to Mark, and I'd left that. So my rational, trained brain went, not in this community, not at this time of year. But I quickly realized that my wife may have also seen the message. So I thought, well, she doesn't have that same training to look at risk. So I went in and told her, I said, did you see the message? She said, no, what was it? And I said, well, the message said there's been a school shooting. She's Australian, and we'd moved back to the States, and her biggest fear was actually gun violence. And I could see at that moment she was gone. So I come as the rescuer to go, no, rational brain says, look, they're hunters. It's a very rural community. There's woods around the school. Deer season, so somebody's seen somebody with a firearm, and it's just that.
And what did it end up being?
It was Sandy Hook.
The Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Were you able to get information about what was going on?
Luckily, yes, but not the right information. The little flash up from the email, there was no information. But before I could even react, my son, who was in the school across from the Sandy Hook Elementary School, texted me, and he said, Dad, there's been a shooting at the elementary school. And he said, the principal's dead. And so the kids between the schools were communicating. It would show up on CNN hours later, but so we were getting a live stream, but it was my son that was feeding me the information.
So your eldest had barricaded himself at the high school across the road. He's feeding you information. You also have a younger son. Yeah. Where was he that day?
Thank God he was home. He said, I'm not feeling well today. Can I stay home?
And he would have been at the primary school?
He would have been at the school next to it. There was several schools around this campus there.
20 children were killed that day. Yours thankfully survived. Did that twist of fate affect you and your family?
It impacts you in ways that you don't realize at first because you're numb. You know, the first reaction is, yay, I'm glad. There's, you know, how can you have guilt? And I think it wasn't until a friend of mine who he lost his son asked how my sons were doing. And I went, oh, I wasn't expecting that kind of a question. And that was just intense guilt. Yeah.
Could you understand why you felt guilty?
Not at first. It's a natural reaction going, you know, and you're struggling with it because I'm happy that they're alive. You know, I couldn't have wanted any, you know, I don't have anything to complain about that day other than the guilt that they lost their innocence. Mm-hmm. They lost friends and for a while lost hope.
Michael, you worked at the Dreamworld theme park on the Gold Coast. What was your role there?
I was guest service supervisor.
And what did that mean?
That means I greeted the guests, was out in the park, dealing with issues that may arise. Out the front, I had a whole routine that I used to perform. It was a very happy time.
In 2016, one of the rides malfunctioned. That led to the deaths of 4 people. Over the coming days and weeks, how did that incident affect you?
It had an enormous effect on me, not at the time. At the time I was in autopilot when the people lost their lives and we had the visual, and I dealt with the families and the children and everything else and the police after that. It wasn't for maybe a few days, a week, that it started to set in. Then I would relive in my mind the visuals of the actual day and the incident that happened, and also the fact that those 4 people I actually greeted at the gates and wished them a happy day and what a great time they were going to have in the park. I felt like I sent them to their demise in a way. And also, I think the what ifs haunt me. What if I had have been closer to the ride? I was duty manager on that day. If I hadn't have been in my office, would I have been out of the ride, turned it off when the siren went off automatically? What if I had have been more vocal for Dreamworld, in Dreamworld, and with maintenance of the rides and safety and things like that? Being in guest service, it's easy to say, you know, I've heard it 100 times and I'll probably hear it 100 more, that it's not your fault. How could you be responsible when you work for an organisation and you're under that umbrella? We assume the responsibility of that organisation, and I really did. I felt it. I felt like we'd betrayed these people. And one of the husbands of one of the victims, I remember saying to him outside, after I'd seen his wife had passed away, the paramedics are with her, everything will be fine. I was lying to him, and I'll never forgive myself for that.
The accident made global headlines and you found yourself in the spotlight. What was that like?
It was difficult. It was very hard. The more media coverage we got, the worse it got for us as employees, as staff, in that Joe Public could be pretty, well, he could be putrid. And I received death threats, my family did. The more publicity, the more broadcast it went, the worse we were. And it was quite extensive, and it had an enormous impact on me.
What was it like walking into work those few months you still worked there?
It had a massive impact. As time, I worked there 3 months. Afterwards, I felt an obligation to my staff to carry them through. And after 3 months, I didn't plan to. I turned up for work, and I couldn't soak up one more piece of abuse, one more horrible call, email. I couldn't deal with it. And I said to my manager, first time in my life, I can't do it, I'm going. And I quit that day. I had no faith in people whatsoever. Seeing what we received, around 14,500 pretty filthy emails and phone calls. As supervisor, I was responsible for those. And that compounded because I started to feel like they had a point, like what they were saying, maybe it was correct, maybe I was what they were saying I was. I'd never experienced anxiety or guilt to this level. And I went to a heart specialist because I started to have anxiety attacks and I thought I was dying. And I'd sweat, I'd shake, I'd get palpitations. And he said, Michael, you have anxiety. And I said, you know, I'd like a second opinion. And I actually got a third opinion. And the third heart specialist said, at some point, you're going to have to deal with this. It's not your heart. There's no magic fix. And that's when I started to acknowledge that it had affected me so deeply.
How bad did that sense of guilt get for you?
I'll be honest, I hit a low I never thought I could hit. I was on 29 different medications and I just couldn't function anymore. It was a hazy existence. So I wanted to get off them all, and I had to go in on a supervised withdrawal from all the medications. And I actually remember one day, I just didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to wake up the next day. I didn't want to be here. I wasn't suicidal, but I regretted every day waking up. And I eventually, over 2-3 weeks, managed to get off all the medication. I got more clarity around processes and thinking. And then I started acknowledging just where I'd sunk to over 12 months. I'd hit a pretty low.
David, you're a clinical psychologist. What is guilt?
It's compassion and love. It causes you to feel almost like there's a pit of the stomach feeling and almost feeling like you fell off your chair backwards. And if you follow that impulse, what it makes you want to do is to repair or fix something. That's what guilt is. That's why we call it a corrective emotion.
Is guilt the same as shame?
Well, basically, guilt is I did something bad, whereas shame is I am bad. Guilt comes with this feeling that you've got this pit of the stomach, you're falling off the back of your chair, and it causes you to have an impulse to repair, whereas shame is a heavy, exhausting feeling where you often feel hopeless and helpless and despairing and can lead to depression. But I would say shame is often a detour from guilt.
Julia, in 2020, you met a man at work. How would you describe your relationship?
So he was a contractor at my work and we'd worked together for a few years. Then in the year 2020, when COVID happened, a relationship started. So essentially, I started an affair with this man.
How did the relationship make you feel?
At the start, I was a bit numb. It's never something that I would have thought I would have gone down that road. But essentially, I decided to throw caution to the wind and went along with it.
Are you still together?
No.
How long did the relationship last?
It lasted for about 2.5 years.
And how did it end?
Over time, there was a lot of lies, deceit, and I couldn't live with it anymore. I had wanted to end it earlier and he wasn't taking it well. And when I eventually ended it, another form of guilt arose because I felt that I had hurt him, but I had also hurt his marriage. By this time, his wife had found out and their relationship had ended. But there was still a lot of lies and deceit moving on from that, and I just couldn't do it anymore, and I decided to end the relationship.
When you discovered that marriage had ended, how did you feel and sort of about the person that you felt you were at the time?
I felt terrible because, you know, that wasn't how I was raised. It wasn't who I wanted to be. It wasn't who I was, and it was something that I hid from a lot of my family and friends at the time because of the guilt and the shame. I didn't think that people would understand. I also wasn't very open about how I was feeling at the end of my last relationship. I think I just didn't want to bother people with my problems. And I think that was a mistake. Eventually I broke down and ended up talking to my father about it. And that was a good thing because it sort of proceeded to clear my head and to be able to make the right decisions by me and what I thought was right.
Alrighty, you've got some cheese, I'll do.
I really started to feel guilty when I became a mum. I don't think I've ever felt such intense guilt about anything in my life before.
What's inside Joel?
I'm a single mum and have been since the day my son was born. I have a lot of responsibility to be both mum and dad. My parents live about 2 hours drive away. For me, daycare is really the only option for reliable care. I work part-time 3 days a week now. If I work full-time, I could afford a better house, a better car, a better school, but then I would feel like I was missing out on having that time with him.
Oh, you're going to do a big jump to mummy? Good job.
When I started sending Felix to daycare, it was only 1 day a week. People told me that I was selfish, that if I couldn't handle him 24/7 by myself, then I should never have had him, that I didn't deserve him, and those things really, it's really hard to feel like you are doing something wrong. I've had friends say to me, I should be trying to find a stepdad for my son. I do feel like maybe I've failed him from the start. Being a parent, it's almost like you are guilty of one thing, and if you do the opposite, you're also guilty. There's no winning, and it's like an impossible task.
Stephen, you're a dad to 2 young children. Is parental guilt something you've also experienced?
Since the day they were born, it gave me some sort of drive and motivation to provide security, provide for them opportunities, etc. But at the same time, that pulled me away from my kids in a world where, you know, cost of living's through the roof. There's more of you to everyone else. You're trying to be, I guess, a great boss, a great employer, a great husband, a great mate, and then that leftover energy is for your children. And for me, I guess the biggest guilt I had was coming home to these little kids. They want to play with Dad, but your head was in the future, thinking about job security and thinking about providing opportunities, and you were so guilty in that moment. You knew you weren't present, and I think they knew it also. It's something I know as a dad I deal with daily, and I'm sure mums feel the same.
Patricia, you also have young children. Can you relate to the parenting guilt?
Definitely. I was born with a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Sometimes being a wheelchair user means that I can't do the things that other parents sort of do with their kids, or I can't spend the time I need to spend with my kids, or that I think I need to spend with my kids. So it's a struggle, yeah.
Your husband, Sean, is your main carer. How do you feel about that?
I get emotional about it. We've been together for over 20 years, so obviously he was aware that I had this when we got together. We were young, so I didn't really think of the future. I'm here now, and things sort of are falling apart a little bit health-wise, but he's my best friend. He goes above and beyond to be my carer, but to be the dad and be the mum sometimes when I'm not there, and, you know, to provide for us. So I'm lucky, but I do have a sense of guilt, especially if I'm laying in a hospital bed and I'm lonely, and that's sort of when I struggle with that guilt.
Is that guilt because he's taking up more of the parenting family role, or is it because, geez, this is not what you signed up for? What is that guilt?
I think it's a little bit of everything. A lot of the time, I think it's not what he signed up for. Someone our age generally would be, you know, going on lovely holidays, and Sean loves to hike and do all these really fun things. I wear an AFO, sometimes I'm in a wheelchair. That's not really conducive to hiking. So we've had to put a lot of our plans on hold. So next year I'll have some big surgery, bilateral knee replacements, that will go to bilateral hips, various other things, you know, over the next few years. So our big dream holiday, you know, to do the lap of Australia, that's on hold because we have to save for me to be off work. So it does eat at me at times.
How does Sean feel about your guilt?
Pretty relaxed, you know, he's a down-to-earth guy, and he just tells me, don't worry about it, you know, suck it up, it's fine. This is what I signed up for, we're married, we're a team. What he does, you know, I'll always compliment it with something else. So I've probably got a bit of a stubborn attitude, and I think that's maybe because I do suffer guilt. I try and flip that on its head and use that to spur me on to, you know, show my family, don't give up. Go in, if you want to do something, go in and do it. It might look a little bit different, the time frame might be a little bit longer, but you can do it. You've just got to be resilient.
David, I feel like I don't need to ask this question, but how common is parental guilt?
I think it's the most common of all guilt, really, you know, and again, I take a lot of heart from it because it's a beautiful thing that we have this guilt, because if we listen to it, and I think the problem is often we don't, we go to shame. If we listen to it, and Stephen's a perfect example of this, we correct. And we spend the time that our inner intelligence is telling us that we need to.
Stephen, that correction, you would agree with that?
100%.
In what way did you do that?
Yeah, so for me, obviously, me being in in that world of providing security, it created a distance between the kid's mum and I. It ended up with a marriage separation. My kids obviously no longer living full time with me, so that guilt kicked in more because as a dad, as a man, I felt like a failure not keeping my family together. So that's something I struggle with daily. But I realised for my kids to be, I guess, flourish and thrive, I need to work on my inner self a little bit and do that inner work. So, yeah, eventually, obviously, quit my corporate job, found something to love being a dad, and I started a community for dads. So, yeah, just put my life savings in it and got corporate sponsors and businesses involved, and it's allowed me to be flexible, be more present with my kids, and, you know, try and be the best dad I can be, yeah.
Eva, you work in finance. Were there expectations for your life and your career?
Of all the family that I know, you know, we are the first to migrate. Like, I'm from China, so we're, I think, the first to migrate out. And, you know, it's really different quality of life here. So to kind of be given the opportunity to go to university and things like that, there's definitely the expectation that you follow that really strict, rigid, typical career path.
Last year you took on a second career.
Yeah.
What was it?
So last year I started pursuing acting. I took like my first ever beginner acting class, and yeah, since then I've kind of been actively pursuing that.
How's that felt for you?
Well, it's, on one hand, you're given this really privileged path, which honestly to so many people is a dream. Like, I work from home most days. I know that's a dream to most people, and it is. Like, I have a great job, and to kind of potentially be willing to throw that away to pursue something creative, you do feel really guilty. My parents specifically, they would probably, you know, kill to have been given the same opportunities. But yeah, you just got to, yeah.
Yeah, I can see it makes you feel quite emotional
I feel
there.
really bad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Callie, you feel guilty about your relationship with family and friends. Why is that?
I predominantly rescue neonatal puppies that are born with birth defects or illness or injury. So they come to me sometimes minutes old, hours old, or a couple of days old, and they need 24/7 round-the-clock care, which often means tube feeding every 2 hours for the first 3 to 4 weeks of life. And often I'll have like a couple in my nursery at that time. I am the director of the rescue, but I'm also the primary carer of the rescue, which means doing this, I can't work a full-time job because it is like all-consuming, but that also means like all my finances are also consumed by the rescue. I do get donations and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, when things need to be bought on the spot or replaced, or bills need to be paid for electricity, that's on me. So it takes everything I've got.
Have you lost any friendships or relationships?
Oh, a lot. I went to a primary school that most of that went to the same high school, and it was very cliquey, and there was a group of girls that I was friends with through primary school and high school and a little bit after high school. But the minute my life became really like out of the ordinary, they were having babies and baby showers and weddings and all that stuff. I just couldn't make it. And I lost like a really close friend because I was really unaware that she was going through a divorce, and I wasn't around for that. And I felt really guilty, and I was like, I'm so sorry I can't be there for you. But meanwhile, I had like a rescue dog that had just given birth to puppies in my house, and one of those puppies had a birth defect and he ended up dying. And I was sleeping in the room with that, and it was just so overwhelming. So it was so hard to explain how unavailable I was, but, you know, and I felt so much guilt. And I never recovered from that friendship or that group of friends because I just I feel like it was always seen that I was wrapped up in myself.
And what about marriage?
Yeah, so I was married when I went into the rescue world. He and I worked in advertising together, so we met in that corporate environment. He was a really relaxed, kind of quiet person, and he enjoyed the dogs, but he was always trying to limit how many I could save, and I was always pushing that. And then I believe that, you know, by the end of our marriage, it really was like the rescue work was becoming too much for him. I don't feel a lot of guilt for that because for me that was my passion, and it was actually keeping me much happier than being in that corporate environment, which was really not like helping me on a mental health level. And so while he wanted me to go back into the corporate environment, for me, it was just not an option. So the marriage ended, and yeah, it was probably the 6th dog that I adopted that I think 3 weeks after I was like, we're adopting this one, was when the marriage sort of ended. So,
David, how big an impact can our guilt have on those around us?
Well, it depends really. I mean, if you have a healthy relationship to guilt, which I think is quite rare, then it just motivates you to be a better person. And that can benefit from everyone around you. But unfortunately, I think the majority of us avoid our guilt, and that's really a societal thing. It's our relationship with guilt is not very healthy. And as a consequence, what happens is we can often feel shame, or we avoid it, or we deny it, or we project it onto others and we say, I'm doing this because you're doing that. But I think it's the shame one that really impacts people the most, because it can cause them to withdraw and detach and become quite hopeless and helpless, as I said, and therefore depressed.
Michael, you were a duty manager at Dreamworld in 2016 when 4 people died on one of the rides. How did your sense of guilt affect those around you?
Oh, look, it had a profound effect on my children and my wife. I remember vividly picking my daughter Tegan. She was 9 at the time, and I picked her up from after-school care about a week after the incident, and the teacher came over to me and said, Michael, how's Tegan after what happened? And I said, what are you talking about? She said, one of the parents was bullying her in the playground about, if your dad's big enough and ugly enough to murder people, he should cop what he gets. She'd been defending my son, her little brother at the time, because the other kid was saying to Riley, your dad murders people, your dad kills people. And Tegan popped in and said, no, it was an accident, and that's when the parent interjected. So I saw the principal, and the parent was warned off the school. And I remember saying to Tegan, you know, why didn't you tell me? It was like 5 days ago. Why? She said, Dad, I thought you were going through enough at the time. At 9 years old, which kind of made me feel so inadequate as a father, as a dad, that her heart, God bless her, was so big that she was trying to protect me from any more emotion. So that's just how significant they must have seen me change and what I was going through.
Tegan, you're Michael's daughter. You were 9 when the accident happened. What was that time like for you?
When the accident first happened, Dad was functioning, still going to work, so I didn't pick up on a lot of it, and he did try to shield it from us at the start. But as it progressed and then he quit work and all of that, it was sort of like you lost a person, like you lost that role model. It's not the same person anymore. And like if a kid loses a toy and walks up to you and says, I lost my toy, like the first thing you want to do is fix that. So I wanted it to be fixed, and I knew I couldn't do that, and that's probably how it affected me. And same with my brother as well. We all felt like we wanted to fix it, but we didn't. We knew we didn't have that potential.
How challenging was it, Tegan, to see your dad carrying around all this guilt?
It was horrible because he didn't deserve it, and I knew that. A lot of people around us, our family, our friends, they all knew that he didn't deserve it. But guilt is one of those things that you can't just say you don't deserve it and it goes off. It just lingers, and seeing it linger and affect someone so much just really hurts you internally and physically. You just feel like you've got to do more, but you know at the end of the day that's not going to change anything.
Mark, following the Lindt Cafe Siege, you were also overwhelmed with guilt for the deaths of 2 hostages. What toll did that take on your family and friends?
Yeah, so not only did I have guilt for not performing a certain action when I could have, I spent a lifetime of, during my marriage and being a husband, to build a secure and safe household and home. And through my guilt manifested in PTSD symptoms, I was difficult to live with. I was hypersensitive to loud noises, even sudden, like loud noises, but sudden loud noises, like dropping a utensil on the kitchen floor. I'd erupt in anger. Crowds and heavy traffic would cause me to have anxiety attacks. And so my whole family, I disrupted that safe environment that I'd worked hard to create with my former wife. And I had guilt over that, immense guilt, because you're disrupting a safe environment where your kids or your wife was walking eggshells around you. It's a terrible feeling.
You said former wife, the marriage ended up not lasting?
There was a factor in the breakup, definitely. Yep.
And that was 24 years?
24 years, yeah.
How did you begin to turn the corner?
It started with asking for help. So I tried to fix it myself. I went and did a silent Buddhist retreat where you don't talk and don't communicate and meditate all day. I was happy when I came out of that, but I wasn't addressing the issue properly. So I had to get professional help, and that was putting my hand up and saying, please help me.
After the event and tragedy of Dreamworld, I hit a very low level. The guilt, the visuals, the flashbacks. I had no purpose. My wife would go to work, my kids would go to school. I needed a reason, I needed something that matched me. I saw Archie, the parrot, advertised, and he just looked so peculiar and so odd that I thought, this bird just fits me. He gave me a purpose, a reason to get out of bed every day. When I received Archie and felt the improvements in myself, I decided this was a winner. This was something I had to share with other people. Let's see how he goes with another bird. Let's see how he interacts. Parrots for Purpose started as a social enterprise non-profit where we, in a nutshell, breed, purchase, train, hand-raise birds to distribute to people in need living with mental and physical disability, returned soldiers, domestic violence survivors. They talk, they listen, they mimic. How is it going? Yeah, busy day?
Yeah, really.
Have there been many through?
Yeah.
Working with my kids now is the proudest I've ever been. I get emotional, I get a tear in my eye looking at them. They're very compassionate and empathetic because of what they've been through. Now these guys feed themselves, okay, so I find now I'm a much better person from what I've been through. I've managed to grow from it and embrace life and impart some good in the world. With the emotions of guilt and anxiety, depression, you can never cure it, but you can become a better person because of it.
Michael, can guilt be a healthy emotion?
I think it can. I really do. And managed, it can be very healthy. I think it's something you learn to manage and you learn to deal with the symptoms and deal with how it affects you. And once I did that and acknowledged it, dealt with it, faced it, embraced it, I can release it, it's still there, but it gets less every time.
Do you see the world differently now?
Oh, absolutely. When my staff would come to me when I was managing people and they would say to me, I've got a psychologist appointment, I would mock them and I'd say, how does that make you feel? Now I've got a total different understanding and respect for mental health. I've got a more empathetic approach to so many more people and so many more things in life. And I've learnt over this to focus on the good and just to see what's good in the world. And that helps with the guilt as well.
Kelly, what about you? Do you think guilt can be healthy?
Yeah, I do. For me, I have a lot of guilt of animals that I haven't been able to save, whether that's speaking to a breeder and because timing, or for whatever reason, they've chosen to just euthanise an animal that I think probably didn't need to be euthanised. But it also is the fact that I do get a lot of animals that come to me on death's door, and sometimes they come to die in my hands, and I overthink, what could I have done? Is there something I could have done? And I feel like the guilt of not being able to save all of them is what keeps me going. So it has a really positive effect. I don't know if it's a healthy feeling for me, because for me, it does drive me to do more work and continue, but to a point of like that's all I really feel like I prioritise in life. And so it can also have a really negative impact, but that's just on me, not so much other people. The people who get to adopt the puppies that I've raised and saved, it's a really positive thing. That the guilt of continuing on has, resulted in a lot of lives being saved and homes with lots of unique and fun little puppies.
Does it ever get a bit too much for you?
The fact that it's all consuming with my time, my finances, like my social life, and often I'm not getting a lot of sleep because I physically can't, and when I don't have neonates to look after, I just can't get to sleep because I'm overthinking things. And when you're sleep deprived and you're financially stressed and you're worrying about life or death things, it does sort of combine into anxiety and depression, and like I gaslight myself a lot about whether I'm doing the right thing, whether I'm being selfish, even accepting donations and volunteer help, I start gaslighting myself, thinking like, am I just abusing this and using this, like when I really should just do it myself? So yeah, I'm now medicated, have been for a long time, and I'm not sure that I will be able to come off medication for those things whilst doing rescue. It's just sort of like the price that I personally pay.
Do you think you'll ever stop the work you do?
I find it impossible to drive past like roadkill and not get out and check pouches. And like I saw 2 birds with little baby birds the other day on my way to an appointment, and I literally stopped for 15 minutes just to like keep like getting the baby birds off like the curb. And then after my appointment, I drove back to like sit there and watch them for another 15 minutes. So I don't know that I'll ever be able to stop rescuing, but I do feel I'll need to, like at some point, can't be the priority forever. I just can't, because it's unsustainable. So,
David, you're a psychologist. What positive role can guilt play in our lives?
When we have a world that understands guilt and responds to this inner compass of our goodness, I think we live in a much more compassionate world. I think you've seen here today.
Why do you think the emotion of guilt gets such a negative rap?
2 reasons come to mind. One is, unfortunately, we live in a society, a family system, often an educational system as well, that doesn't allow people to make mistakes, that shames you for being imperfect or flawed. And that's basically saying that we shame people for being human, because we're all imperfect, flawed, and sometimes guilty. That's what makes us human. And the second reason, I think, is because guilt is an extremely painful emotion to feel viscerally in the body. And if I asked you to pick your finger with a needle, you'd probably say no. And guilt's exactly the same thing. We avoid it at all costs because it's very painful. But I do believe that if we educated people about guilt, about its utility, about its beauty, then I think we'd build our capacity to tolerate it.
Darren, your 2 sons attended the school where 20 children and 6 teachers were killed in the Sandy Hook shooting. You described feelings of guilt that other parents lost their children. How did you and your family deal with that?
Yeah, at first we didn't. Then we looked out of guilt of we allowed guns to be sold, weapons of war to be sold in our local stores. So there's a guilt that I allowed that in my community, knowing, well, actually, I wasn't knowing. I chose not to get involved. So the guilt drove myself, and then each of my family members made a conscious decision to speak out if they would like to. So that guilt eventually drove some anger about needing better gun legislation. Worked for years, several years, to try to get it. And the guilt was out of that effort that a lot of the states actually loosened their gun legislation as a way of saying, hey, you can't take our guns, and the laws that we had in place we're going to nullify. So there was an awareness that we couldn't change a culture. My sons wanted to come back to Australia. They were born here, and we wanted to offer them an American experience by going back, and they got it. When we chose to come back as a family, the overwhelming guilt that I had, that I still live with, and it reminds me, was that we didn't change nothing. We couldn't enact better legislation. We've moved on with our lives, but every so often that guilt reaches out and taps me on the shoulder, because I start receiving a lot of texts saying, Darren, we're thinking of you. And I know that there's been a mass shooting in America, and I would love to know that people are just thinking of me, and all of a sudden this is the best day of my life, that I've got 30 texts of people saying that they're thinking of me, but I know what it really means. So it was the one thing that I could look at myself, what happened to me. I'd already had a previous diagnosis of PTSD. So the first thing that I did with that guilt was I shared with my sons what it's like to have that diagnosis. I had been a police officer and left with a suicide attempt, but I didn't discuss it in the family. There was a lot of shame and guilt about that chapter of my life, so I've reinvented myself. So the guilt drove me to say, as a way of protecting you, I need to be honest. That eventually led me to a lot of other great people that told me their stories about children that they had lost. And I found in that space that I could hear those stories, and I was honored that people would share them. We have a term that's called vicarious trauma, by hearing these traumatic themes. Over the past couple of years, I've worked really hard to kind of look at it as vicarious resilience. You know, hearing these stories, you know, actually pumps me up and gives me hope, and builds my own resilience. And the work I do in suicide prevention now, it's a driving force.
Julia, you were in a relationship with a married man, and that affair led to the breakdown of his marriage. Has your sense of guilt over that led to any positive changes?
I would say yes. Towards the end of that relationship, I had to really dig deep and have a good look at who I was and who I wanted to be. And I've actually as well got some counselling as well, because I think there were some deeper issues involved with myself. And I think now there's been a lot of growth from that. Whoever the person that I was then is not the person I am now. And I've been very humbled by it, I think. I feel a lot less judgment for different situations that I come across and see in my life. There's been a lot of growth for myself personally, and I think that I hope that moving forward that I can be a better person for it, and maybe even help someone who has been through something similar.
Do you believe that guilt can be a sort of positive emotion?
Yeah, I think if you decide to do something about it and grow from it, yes. I think if I didn't feel any guilt or shame from what I did, I think that would be an issue. And yes, I think that definitely they can be, provided you do the work.
Mark, how about you? Is there sort of a positive side to feeling guilty?
Yeah, I'd have to say yes. For me, it started with a negative connotation in that I was going through the what if process. What if I did this? What if I did that? But more recently, I've moved into a very positive thing arising from the effects of trauma on persons that have been involved in traumatic incidents.
Following the siege, you left the police force after 24 years. Have you made peace with your guilt?
Yes, I think so. And I'm still a work in progress. It's not fixed. I'm not all better, but certainly think I'm back on track, for want of a better term.
Patricia, you live with a degenerative health condition and you feel guilty about the impact that has on your family. Have you been able to reconcile those feelings of guilt?
I think I've had a long time to process that sort of guilt. And it's not to say I still don't feel guilty in some situations, but I think I've really harnessed that guilt and flipped it and sort of used my experience to help other people. You know, it's a very small community, people with EDS, so reaching out to people on the internet who might be in similar situations and reassuring them. Even the gym I go to, you know, people that might suffer a minor injury, you know, that think this is it, I can't go to the gym. And I'm like, no, you can. You've just got to adapt things, you know. So just reaching out and sharing my story, I think that's how I've harnessed my guilt.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you all for being here. That's all we have time for. Thank you too for joining us. You can catch up on this episode or any others on SBS On Demand. I'll see you next time.